I want to begin my content, though, by thinking about what Scripture says about marriage. We might begin with Genesis, and those of you who have read the Church of England's report, which came out last year about men and women in marriage, will realise that that is precisely where that report wanted to begin. Drawing on Genesis 1:26 to 28, I hope you can read. The report argues that marriage is an expression of human nature which God has willed for us and which we share. And although marriage, it says, may fall short of God's purposes in many ways and be the scene of many human weaknesses, it receives the blessings of God and is included in his judgment that creation is very good. Genesis 1:31. This passage, the creation of men and women in our likeness, male and female, he created them, has been often been read, and men and women in marriage does this, to present the complementarity of male and female as a fundamental aspect of the created order. Martha Meyer has argued that this is about saying that men and women are both necessary to encompass the full image of God, and that this is affirmed also in the New Testament. She also wants to take that further, that men and women in relationship are reflective of the creative, generative and governing aspects of God. And I think that's really important. Men and women in relationship are reflective of the creative aspects of God. Part of this is about saying that marriage is about procreation. If we read it this way, Genesis offers us a vision of marriage as the means by which male and female human beings are drawn into and share in God's creative purposes. Men and women in marriage goes on to affirm, we share with many animal species the sexual differentiation of male and female, serving the tasks of reproduction and the nurture of children. But we do more than share it, we build on it to enhance the bond between the sexes culturally. To flourish as individuals, we need a society, says the report, in which men and women relate well to each other. I wouldn't deny any of that, but it doesn't seem to me that necessarily implies that marriage has to be between one man and one woman. And many of you may realise that I was one of the drafters of that report, and several of us were trying to argue a rather more open argument within that process. So the creation stories do offer us, I think, a vision of complementarity between men and women, not only in the increase of humankind, but also in ensuring the well-being and the flourishing of creation. And I do think that's something important to hold on to. I don't think the complementarity aspect of it is necessarily essential, but the sense that relationships are part of how we actually ensure that creation is well looked after. What I don't think that gives us is a blueprint in the Old Testament for a biblical view of marriage rooted in complementarity or mutuality and simply focused on the procreation and nurture of children. Because in reality, the Old Testament's depiction of marriage is much more complex than this. This is just one aspect, one rather idealised aspect of what we find in the Old Testament. Much of the Old Testament, and particularly the legal codes of the Pentateuch, and I remember writing an essay about the legal codes of the Pentateuch, women in the legal codes of the Pentateuch when I was studying Old Testament, and I have to say it was an incredibly depressing experience. Marriage is basically seen as a contract involving, well, I have here actually written a man and woman, but actually I think it's a contract really involving two men, in which the woman is something that is passed from one to the other. Marriageable women in the Old Testament, in the legal codes, it seems to me, tend to be seen largely as the property, first of their father, or a marriageable woman is the property of her father to be passed on to her husband. Deuteronomy 22, 28, 29, for instance, and there are many other examples, suggests that a man, or instructs that a man who rapes a young unmarried woman who is not engaged to another man must marry her. Exodus 22, 16 to 17 covers the case when a young woman has been seduced by an older man. He has either to marry her or at least to pay her father the bride price. These texts may seem irrelevant to us in our modern world, but I remember doing a Bible study with women in South Africa where lobola is part of the way that their marriages are negotiated, and they had very strong feelings about to whom bride price should be paid at any given time. So in some societies, these texts are still very relevant indeed. I think what's important for our society is to notice that family honour is what is key here. It is marriage in this part of the Old Testament, in the Deuteronomic codes, is about the regulation of inheritance and about the care of as yet unborn children and about men knowing who their children are. Women don't have that problem. Women know that they are the mothers of the children they are born. I don't have any children, but all women I have met who have gone through pregnancy and childbirth know that they are the mother of that child. It's much harder for men to know which children they are the father of. I'm making assumptions here, of course. But if this is about controlling inheritance, this is about saying, if I have made this woman pregnant, then I am actually responsible for her child, but that child also needs to be acknowledged to be mine. What's being depicted in these codes is certainly a relationship between men and women, but also one of the interesting things about the Old Testament is that it's not actually obviously a monogamous relationship. There are quite a lot of instructions about what to do if you want another wife or sister's wives, and about what to do if the husband of somebody dies, and what to do with that woman. Often she's then associated as another wife into an elder brother's family. What I wanted to say is that the Old Testament, this aspect of the Old Testament, is nothing like modern Western understandings of marriage as a relationship between two equals. It's much more about regulation and control, and that is a key aspect of marriage, I want to argue, through history. It's about regulating inheritance, it's about regulating relationships between marriages, between families. It is about the relationship between the two people, but it's much more about how society comes to be structured.